Hi, everyone. Today I wanted to talk to you about information and data, and especially the differences between these two terms. And I'm using here my own definitions, but the definitions I have developed from the literature and from my understanding of how people use the term information and data. And I have come up with two general and special definitions of both information and data that are I have learned from the literature. And beginning with some general definitions of information. So, one definition of information is the signs or symbols that represent or refer to something else in the world. So, in this definition, the understanding is that the information is the signs or the symbols themselves. So, uh, the letters of the alphabet, the data in the databases, in the table of the records, um, the symbol, the kind of different types of symbols. So there's the kind of more like iconic symbol, right? Is a representation of a diskette. Um, there's the QR codes. These are signs or symbols that represent or refer to something else. So by something else, I'm using this term something or something else very generally. So this is anything, really anything abstract or concrete. So it can be emotion, thoughts, um, and or water or buildings and bricks and so on. And there are different kinds of symbols. And the study of this, the study of symbols is called semiotics. And sometimes in this course, I talk about semiotics, but here we're not going to talk about it too much. So we think about it as signs or symbols, and when people talk about information, that's what they're talking about: the signs and symbols in the tables. But the signs or symbols, of course, can be other kinds of signs and symbols, so just like a logo or a trademark for a brand, something like a Christian cross, just numbers or the letters of the alphabet, and so on. Now, another way that people talk about information is as the concept or the interpretation of something in the world. Once again, very broadly stated, any phenomenon or an interpretation of the signs or symbol themselves. So when people are talking about information, often they're talking about that thought itself, that interpretation itself. Um, and so vacation is actually the sign or symbol. So sometimes people think of about information as the sign or symbol. This is a series of letters. So this is a kind of sign or symbol that some people may have an interpretation of it as, well, vacation is always beach, right? Some people may see this and see, less work or time with family, but some people may see this symbol and have the concept or interpretation as the beach or doing something else, of course. But when we talk about information, sometimes people are referring to this conceptualization or interpretation, which is, of course, a human subjective cognitive process. Now, another definition of information, and that's the one I think is kind of really gives the value of information and brings it out, is the relationship itself between the sign or symbol to a concept or interpretation or to something in the world. Now, um, in this definition, the information is the relationship itself, is that association. And that's why I define information the way I do, as a meaning or as relation. But there are different ways to think about it as well. So these are the three general kind of ways to think about information: the signs or symbols, the concept or interpretation, which is a human subjective or cognitive process, and the relationship between those signs or symbols that we see and also something else in the world. So it's just in a way, it's a relationship between two things. A symbol and a sign is a thing, an interpretation is a thing. Or if we think of this image as not just an interpretation, but as an actual beach with rocks and sand and water, then the relationship between this term or this word and can also be to that actual something in the world. So in this sense, information equals meaning, equals relation. whereas meaning is the relation between something and something else, right? So the kids taking tests and all that information about the tests of all the students and so on goes into the database. So information is the relationship between these. And that's how we can also build on the special definition of information. So these are the three. Actually, these are three. So this is kind of comes from this one here. And the special definition of information is information as true semantic content or as a true or reliable connection, representation, or reference or correspondence to something else in the world. So these are other words for relationship, representation, reference, correspondence, meaning. And then in the special definition is also this other additional term here, correct. Correct, valid, true, reliable. I'm using these kind of generally as the same, or truthful, or in the right direction, even if you want to think about it. So in this definition, so this is the last definition of information, the earth is a sphere and the sun is magnetic. A piece of text or speech is information. Somebody says this or writes this is information. Now, if somebody says and writes, the earth is flat and nobody understands what the sun is, this is not information based on this special definition of information as true semantic content. The earth is flat and nobody understands what the sun is. These are letters. So we can think of these as signs and symbols. But it's not information because it's not true or reliable information. Now let's talk about general and special definitions of data. So there is a general definition of data, and that is data as anything given, and that comes from a broad interpretation of the uh, source of that word, which is datum, which is from the Latin, which means given. Given, so something that's just given, anything given. So it can be anything that appears to us, anything that seems to exist, any phenomenon, what I have been calling something, any abstract or concrete something, any difference or pattern that exists. And this is the more theoretical and general view of data. And when people use the term data in common parlance, in common speech, this is not what they mean by data. So you see it in textbooks and stuff, but that's not how people usually talk about data. Now, people usually talk about data in these definitions of data. That's why I call them special definitions of data, because that's not how they talk about it in the textbook. And also, this is, of course, the more general ways to view data, because anything can be data. Now, the special definition of data is recorded information. So data adds the recording element itself. So the letters, numerals, and other symbols that represent something and that have a material basis on a record. So, for example, the cuneiform tablets, the oldest written tablets in the world today, which are about 5,000 years old. That's recorded information. That's data in the database, and so on. The records in the digital records of binary data in the computer. This is all data. It's recorded information on a material basis. Now, there's a separate special definition of data, which is data as recorded correct information. So that's data refers to reliable, carefully recorded information obtained in methodical and valid ways, such as basic official accounts of COVID-19 statistics. So in this definition here, for example, a biased and opinionated opinion article from a newspaper is not data. It's just somebody's opinion. Now we can view that as data because it's an article, it was published, there's a record of it, and so on. So it's data in this sense, but it might not be data in this sense. So, for example, a recent report from article from Johns Hopkins University talking about better data needed to defeat misinformation. Now, they're not talking about just anything given, not better anything needed to defeat misinformation, nor they're saying better recorded information needed to defeat misinformation, unless, of course, they're talking about information in the sense of reliable information, in which case we have definition 2, which is recorded correct information, and that's indeed what they mean here. We need better recorded correct information to defeat misinformation. And also should mention about fake data and metadata. So real data, as recorded information, maybe we should put it here as recorded information, can refer to fictional or imaginary information. So fake images, fantasy stories, fake news, the newspaper Onion, gibberish, all that made up stuff that is written in words and fake images or imaginary images, that can be real data. It takes symbols to represent that. And we have here a deep fake kind of pointing to that, an image of a deep fake pointing to that. Or it can also be of data of bad quality. So it's not really fake, but it's almost so bad that it's unreliable. In this case, the information about the record itself, the metadata or the metadata of the recording, can be truthful. So for example, we can have a deep fake image, but we have metadata that's truthful. And even help us identify if the data is truthful or not. Yeah, it says right here that the video that I found on YouTube on September 6, 2022 of Jennifer Lawrence and Steve Buscemi is a deep fake. It says right on it. Of course, not always it's going to say right on it, but here it says right on it. This information of the title and where I found it is truthful. So the metadata here is truthful, but the image itself is not. So in summary, we have a view of information as the signs or symbols that could mean or relate to something. So this is just focused on the signs or symbols. Another general definition is the interpretation or conceptualization of something or sign or symbol. And the general definition 3 is focused on the relation itself. So thinking about that relationship being between the sign or symbol or to something. And then lastly, we can think of the relationship being correct or incorrect. And once again, I'm using this term here also as correct direction, not correct as 100% or 0%. So truthful, reliable, and so on. Now on the data side is more about the record. Now there are definitions of generality, like general definitions of data as anything given, any phenomenon, very general, not useful and not usually used. Now, often used, yes, data as any recorded information, so the recorded signs or symbols, just the records, but also more commonly, this one here, I think, data as well-recorded information, so the reliable, methodical, or valid representations of something in the world. And then, of course, we have a last definition here, metadata, which is data or information about the recording of the information. Okay, I hope this clarifies some of these notions for us, and we'll see you next time.